Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on the ABCs of the final traceability rule. My name is Natalia Tello. I am the research manager for the National Mango Board, and I will be moderating this session. In order to begin our presentation, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Sergio Nieto-Montenegro. Dr. Nieto-Montenegro obtained his doctorate in food science from Penn State University. He heads the Food and Nutrition Group based in Chihuahua and El Paso, Texas, which is a group of specialists in converting scientific and technological information to the language of growers and processors through training programs. The group has carried out programs for the American Mushroom Institute, the National Mango Board, and the Arizona and California LGMA associations, the citric, apple, papaya, and avocado industries, and others. The company has over 50 apps, training apps on the App Store, and the programs have been used in 18 different countries. Since 2013, Food Safety CTS had developed food safety and social responsibility programs for the National Mango Board and its members. I would like to hand it over now to Dr. Sergio Nieto-Montenegro. Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you very much for all of the attendees here today to our webinar. Thank you to everyone, or rather, welcome to everyone, and thank you to the National Mango Board for this invitation to talk about this important issue. As Natalia mentioned, we're going to talk about the ABCs of the final food traceability rule. We're going to talk a little bit about the rule, the ABCs of the final traceability rule, the traceability records requirements, the additional requirements for certain foods. So we're going to talk a little bit about what traceability is, what the rule requires, how we can get to work on this, and the resources that the National Mango Board has developed to help you all as an industry. We'll give you some tips regarding the implementation of the rule. And when I was analyzing this rule, we read comments and different documents to prepare this seminar and other resources for the mango industry. We've seen that really we already carry out a lot of these activities. In some cases, many of these activities are already carried out. We have traceability plans, but we will need to make certain adjustments. In some cases, there are packing houses, for example, who have dozens or hundreds of suppliers. And so the question is, what can we do to make sure that we have the traceability information from all of those suppliers when we pack and ship a container? So these are the questions, but let's get started with this webinar by defining traceability. Traceability is the ability of an organization such as the FDA, a private company, or a customer to trace a product through the different stages of production, processing, and distribution. What for? Well, to determine exactly where the product came from and who was involved in transporting and processing it. So let's say I take a mango, let's say somewhere in the United States, in River Falls, Wisconsin. It's a small town in Wisconsin, way in the north of the country where it's very cold. And let's say I buy it at a Walmart or a Wegmans or a Costco close to Minneapolis. I should be able to find out where that mango came from what import warehouse, what packing house, what field, what orchard specifically. So that is called traceability. To be able to trace a product through the different chains in the supply chain, different links rather. So the purpose of traceability is to identify the origin, and when there's an outbreak of foodborne illness, we can determine what product caused it so that it can be quickly recalled from the market. It also helps me to determine what other products could be contaminated as well. So knock wood, let's say that we have a problem with a microorganism and we have to do a product recall. I'm not even talking about an outbreak, a market recall. So let's say I'm Sergio's packing house and I'm told, well, we have to recall your product and I'm going to perhaps have to recall the product from a whole work week. But if I have a good traceability program, I can identify the specific lot. So I'm provided the lot number and then I can determine where that lot is. And instead, therefore, of having a huge problem and having to do a huge recall, for example, production from an entire week, if I have a lot code, a specific lot code, and if I have a very good traceability program, perhaps I will only have to recall a single lot and perhaps just 3 or 4 pallets or an entire truck. I'm not sure. But that's very different than having to recall an entire week or 2 weeks of production. So traceability is extremely important for that reason because it allows us to identify and isolate products before they cause a larger problem for public health. So really, this is a very important element of food safety. So what is the traceability rule? Food traceability rule. Well, this rule is part of the Food Safety Modernization Law. This is an FDA law known as FSMA in English, the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was signed into law in 2011. It has 7 rules. Some of these rules we are already familiar with. And so this is FSMA 204. And this rule, well, what does it set forth? The rule requires additional documentation for people and orchards who produce, process, pack, or store foods included on the food traceability list. So this requires that companies subject to the rule establish a traceability plan. So what are the objectives of the rule? Well, as I mentioned, the rule will allow us to quickly identify food products and recall them, products that are potentially contaminated. This will allow us to reduce foodborne illness outbreaks and deaths. So the FDA, in order to achieve this end, which is the agency, the FDA, which is the agency that regulates food products, including fresh mangoes, has identified certain important steps in the supply chain for which certain records must be maintained. So the requirements vary depending on the activities that are performed in each of the stages of the supply chain. So it is very important to know whether or not the traceability rule applies to us. And it does, in fact, apply to fresh mangoes. By when do I have to comply with this rule? I must be in compliance by January 20th of 2026. It is a single compliance date for all companies, depending on the independent of the size. Why is it a single date? Well, as I go through the rule, you will see that there are different steps that are very closely related and companies of different sizes. So having a single implementation date means that we will all have to be on the same page. So who is subject to the requirements of the rule? Persons or companies, both foreign and those located within the United States, that operate in the supply chain and produce, process, package, or store foods included on something that the FDA calls the food traceability list that will be consumed within the United States of America. So if you have a food product that is going to be consumed in the US and it is on the food traceability list, you will be subject to the requirements of the rule. So in this case, in the National Mango Board, we work with fresh mangoes, and fresh mangoes are included on the food traceability list. So I'm not going to talk about how the FDA generated this food traceability list. It has to do with the level of risk, with previous outbreaks. The FDA created a ranking, and that's how the FDA came up with this list of food products, and mangoes are on this list. So fresh mangoes are on the food traceability list, and they are specifically mentioned in the fresh tropical tree fruits section. So this is something that we must comply with. There are certain exemptions, partial or full exemptions from compliance with the rule based on the size of the company and also what happens with the product. So there is a tool here that the FDA has provided to determine if you qualify for an exemption. So let's now talk about what the rule requires. So basically, there are 4 basic concepts that we have to be very familiar with. The first one, which we already addressed, is the food traceability list. And I think we all understand that fresh mangoes are on the food traceability list. And then there are 3 other important concepts that are key for compliance with the rule, which are the critical tracking events. In English, it's CTEs, critical tracking events, and I will refer to these as CTEs, critical tracking events. And then we have the key data elements, or KDE, and the third concept is a traceability lot code. So we're going to go through these one by one. Mangoes, as we know, go through several hands. And so the tracing is particularly difficult when there are many different points in the supply chain where the product could be combined with other products or processed or transformed. The rule defines the steps, the traceability steps that are more complicated as critical tracking events. We have a lot of stages throughout the supply chain. So we have the orchard and then harvesting, transport to the packing house, initial packing, and then the shipping, reception, or receiving. So some of these steps, these elements of the supply chain for mangoes or other foods, the FTA calls these points critical tracking events. So we're going to look at the definition. Critical tracking events are supply chain events involving harvesting, cooling, initial packaging of a fresh produce product other than a food obtained from a fishing vessel, first receipt ashore of a food obtained from a fishing vessel, shipping, receiving, or processing of foods. These are all defined as critical tracking events. So in simple terms, we can define this and we can simplify this, then make it compatible with what we do in the mango industry. So the critical tracking events are the events that involve certain steps where something happens and the FDA says something is happening here, and this is a critical event that I have to trace.
So the critical tracking event in the industry of mangoes includes harvesting, initial packing, shipping, reception, and transformation of the product. And probably you will be wondering, but we're not transforming the product. We're not making juice out of mangoes. However, for the FDA, the transformation of a product corresponds to a very specific definition, which includes repacking of mangoes. If I mix produce from different lots, from different providers during my processing, if I repack mangoes and I mix mangoes from different lots, FDA refers to this event as transformation. I will share with you some examples of transformation. For instance, let's assume that I have Sergio's Mangoes, a packing company in Sinaloa. and I ship to a warehouse in McAllen. In that warehouse, they mix my mangoes from different lots with mangoes from another provider because my client wants a specific size of mango or a specific grade of mango. What this warehouse is doing, mixing different lots, this is transformation according to the FDA, and it is considered a critical tracking event. So, what do I have to do? I need to see within my company what critical tracking events I need to monitor. And then I need to determine what data I need to gather. So did you already identify critical tracking events for your company? If you're harvesting, well, you're harvesting. If you're a packer, then you have initial packing. If you're a warehouse, sometimes you transform the produce. Let's imagine that I have a mango pallet and I take a few mangoes out because they are not to the standard of my client. This is not transformation. If I have one lot with 4 different pallets and I only take the mangoes that I really like so that I can satisfy my customer, this is not transformation. However, if I use different lots to create one pallet, this is transformation in one warehouse. Let's move on then. Another important concept that we need to understand is key data elements. This is a very important concept. The rule defines key data elements, or KDEs, as the information associated with a CTE for which a record must be maintained and provided. It's hard, right? But let me share that with you in very simple terms. The critical tracking events are events that are critical and I need to gather information. Now, key data elements are the information that I need to associate with that phase of the process. So this is how we would define key data elements. The rule defines key data elements, or KDEs, as the information associated with a CTE for which a record must be maintained and provided. In other words, KDEs are the information that we need to gather in each critical tracking event. This bullet point is key to understand the rule. I will finish my key tracking elements, and then I need to see what type of information I need to gather for each of my critical tracking events. These data are usually related to information on where the product is located, where it came from, and where it's going. Also, the identification of the quantity of product in the lot and on what dates it was found at the location. Key data elements, or KDEs, work as product fingerprints, marking where a specific batch of product has been and how it was handled during the period. Let's remember now the critical tracking events that we have in the mango industry. Maybe not all of them apply to you. Maybe you only have one or a few. There's harvesting of the product, initial packing, shipping, receiving. All of these are critical tracking events that are usually found in the mango industry. I love this slide. I love it because here you can see the full rule. These are things that might apply to you, or some of them might apply to you. If you're an orchard and you harvest, you will have harvesting KDEs. If you cool, you will have cooling KDEs. Now, if you're doing packing, you might have initial packing and also shipping. If you're processing, then you might have receiving KDEs as well as transformation and shipping KDEs. If you're a distributor, then you will have reception KDEs and shipping KDEs. If you're a retailer, then you will have shipping KDEs or reception KDEs. all the KDEs must be linked to the traceability lot of the food. And I will expand a little bit on this. Is it clear? Because this is very important. The name of those phases are called CTEs, or critical tracking events, and I need to have KDEs, key data elements, for each one of these critical tracking events. Now let's see what type of information I need. If I harvest, then I will need to collect certain KDEs. I will give you some specific examples. For instance, your KDEs could be a description of the product, the mango variety, the quantity of the product that you're harvesting, a description of the location of the orchard where the mangoes were harvested, the name of the orchard and the field, as well as its location as precisely as possible. What other KDEs do I need if I'm a harvester? A description of the location of who will receive the product. That's probably the packing house to which it will be shipped, the date of harvest, the type of reference document, and its number. In some cases, the FDA understands that you don't want to share the name of the orchard where you're buying your produce from. But sometimes you can share the number of records of the facility or another type of data. In initial packing, you will need to have the following KDEs: a description of the product, a description of the location of the orchard where the mangoes were harvested, the date of reception, the quantity of product, and here you will assign a traceability lot code for the product that you're packing. So when you're taking the mangoes, you will be assigning a lot code, a traceability lot code for your produce, as well as a description of the location of who will receive the product, a description of the packed product, the variety of the mango, a description of the location of the initial packing, the date of packing, the quantity of product packed, the type of reference, and its number. Now, for shipping, when you ship your produce, you need to ship it with your KDEs, and you need to include the traceability lot code, the quantity of product, a description of the product, and a description of the location of who will be receiving your product. For shipping, you need a description of the location from which the product is being shipped, the date of shipment, a description of the location of the origin of the traceability lot code, and the reference document. These are the KDEs that you need for shipping. Now, if you're doing reception, you will need the following. You will need the traceability lot code, the quantity of product, a description of the product. During this webinar, we're not going to be able to memorize everything, right? This is a lot of information. However, I want to create some awareness because I want you to understand the basics of the rule. This is why the name of the webinar is the ABC of food traceability. Because if I try to remember all of the KDEs for every single event, it's going to be too hard and we wouldn't have enough with 1 hour, right? So I want you to understand that you need to first see which are your critical tracking events, what type of KDEs you need, and then how you can apply all of this in your packing facility or in your warehouse, etc. Here I wanted to give you a breakthrough of all the KDEs in a detailed manner, and here I also have examples of transformation and packing. The codes will only be assigned to the initial packing and when there is a transformation, and the lot will be, the code will be accompanying the product throughout the process. I already shared with you what type of data we're looking for, right? This is a KDE, this is another KDE that apply to mango reception. Here we have another KDE and another one that apply to initial packing. Now, if you're doing packing, you will need to have and you will need to keep this information. Everything clear so far? As I was telling you, if you're trying to memorize everything right now, we will go crazy. You will have time to go back to the slides and review. Additionally, I would like to suggest you to use the tools that we created for the Mango National for the National Mango Board, which I will share with you very soon. Please note, I'm sorry, I have a problem with my scrolling. I can't move it. Well, please note how key data elements are usually elements that will connect the products from a previous step with the following step. For instance, initial packing, my KDE will tell me where this product comes from. Usually, the KDE always connects your product from its previous stage to the next stage. In initial packing, you need to know where will these products be shipped to. So again, the KDE will connect these two steps within the supply chain when it applies. However, keeping all of this information is not useful unless you can connect all of this information with other pieces of information. So remember of the example with Robert Fools? Well, for Sergio's mangoes, it would be useless to have all of this information if the person or the company from the previous step doesn't keep the KDEs. They also need to keep those KDEs. Some of these things we're already doing them, right? And I insist everything is in place for some of you. And we need to review what we are already doing, and we need to see how it corresponds to the requirements of the rule. Now, again, the data will not be useful unless we can connect the data with other data from previous steps. And this is why the rule also requires a traceability lot code. And this traceability lot code will always remain the same. This is what the rule says. You can't change the code. You will assign the code at initial packing. And then if there's a transformation event further down the line. The traceability lot code is a special identifier that will help us follow up the product throughout the supply chain. It is an identifier for the specific product, and it's unique for each product lot. Frequently, it's an alphanumeric code. And as you know, well, there's a certain key, right? The rule does not require a specific format. This is also great, right? You can create your lots as you wish. The entity assigning the codes will determine how the coding of the products will be carried out. The rule requires that TLCs be established when a fresh product is initially packed and when the product is transformed.
So the objective of this lot code is to make the traceability process easier. So a traceability lot code should be able to identify the product as long as possible during the chain. So if you already have high technology systems implemented, much of this information is probably already included. But it is important to review and analyze what we have, compare it with the requirements of the rule. The product code should not be changed unless it has been processed in a way that might affect traceability. The rule also requires that if you are subject to the rule, you must have a food traceability plan. You must establish and maintain a food traceability plan. The rule requires you to include a description of the procedures that you use to maintain the records required for compliance with the traceability rule. In other words, how are you going to comply? In your traceability plan, you will describe how the lot numbers are assigned, what your KDEs are, how you will keep your records, where they will be stored, how you determine that your product is on the traceability list. What else do we have to include in the traceability plan? I have to maintain my records for at least 2 years, and you can maintain your records in any format or system. It does not have to be electronic. However, should there be a food safety issue, the FDA may request that you provide these records to the FDA on an electronic sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours. So a sortable spreadsheet is like an Excel sheet. So it is practical to use such a sortable electronic spreadsheet such as Microsoft Excel. Now, I'm not telling you that you have to do it that way, that you have to use Excel. You very likely, many of you already have very sophisticated systems that could provide this type of file, an electronic sortable spreadsheet. So if you're a very small company and you use paper and pen, perhaps it would be advisable to use an Excel spreadsheet to maintain this information. So certain elements may already exist in your food safety software or accounting software. Some companies already have traceability software, but remember, this is very different from phytosanitary traceability. So it's important to recognize that it's different, but they're similar. So it may be useful to already have these systems. Also, the traceability plan must include a statement that identifies a contact within your company responsible for answering any questions related to your traceability plan and records. So you have to include that in your traceability plan. If you are an orchard for hemp, for example, a grower, you must include a map of the orchard in your traceability plan that shows the areas where mangoes are grown with the location of each grove and any other area where foods on the food traceability list are grown. It must include the coordinates and any other information necessary to identify the location. Now, remember, much of this information won't be necessary, and you don't have to keep information all the way through the supply chain to River Falls, Minnesota. Just one step behind and one step ahead. So, for example, here we have an example of Doña Berta with the coordinates and a map. So, what would I suggest? Well, many of you are already in compliance with some of the requirements of the final traceability rule, such as, for example, recording certain key data elements. So I would recommend that you do a gap analysis. And as part of that gap analysis, I would recommend that you identify critical tracking events, the critical tracking events you already have, and how many key data elements you must include, and what key data elements is your organization already capturing and maintaining. So what do you already have? Number 4, I'm not sure if I'm on 3 or 4, but what key data elements, additional key data elements must you record and maintain in order to comply with the requirements of the final rule? So if something is missing, you have to think about how to adapt your program to include that element. And then number 5, I don't even know what number I'm on, but how can you work with your partners in the supply chain? It's important to include this in your gap analysis. How can you work with your partners in the supply chain to comply with the requirements of the rule? So if you know that your buyer processes the product, it's important to think about how you can work together to assign another lot code, and so that you're not going to lose mangoes along the way. So also, what types of systems are you using to keep records? What kinds of systems are your partners using, and how can you best combine those records? So it's important to begin to plan how to achieve this integration. Regarding the data, before we go on to the tools that the National Mango Board has, there are different ways of maintaining data and records. There are low, medium, and high technology, super sophisticated high technology options, and you will determine what's best for you. Of course, you can start out with paper and pen with tickets, but in other cases, maybe you're using Excels or other simple programs. And then there are very sophisticated traceability programs that some companies use, and some associations as well have traceability software. So remember, it's important. We also do phytosanitary traceability, but this rule has nothing to do with phytosanitary issues. You can look at what you already have if you're using those systems to determine how you can use those systems and that information to comply with the rule. And what I'd like to explain in the next few minutes is very important. It's very important to do this gap analysis. So, what are the resources available from the National Mango Board? Well, we designed some materials. So, we have some materials that were developed by the National Mango Board. We developed a quick guide regarding the requirements of the food traceability rule. And if you're in a packing house and you don't have a lot of time, you can read this guide in an hour. This is a quick guide. And basically, this explains from a bird's eye view what the rule is. We also have developed a traceability guide for growers, packers, and importers. So let's take a look at these materials. We also have developed some short videos with the basic concepts for the supply chain and the final rule. These videos will be available on the National Mango Board website. So I'd like to show you quickly one of those videos. So when you want to take a little bit of time to learn more about this, these are 3 to 7 minute videos, basic concepts regarding the food traceability rule. For example, this one about CTEs or KDEs. If you want to explain it to someone, you can show this video to people. Basic concepts. In this video, we will go over certain important concepts regarding the food traceability rule. So this is just a quick summary, and I would like to make sure to leave time for questions as well. First, we will go over what traceability is. The FDA defines traceability as the ability to follow a food product and its ingredients throughout all the steps of the supply chain, both one step behind and one step ahead. In other words, traceability means that we can determine where a product has been and how long it has been in each point, even after the product is no longer at that point, thanks to the records that are maintained in each point. Number 2, key data elements. Well, this is what we've been talking about during the webinar. Critical tracking events. The supply chain for a product is very complex since it includes different steps and processes, and the product goes through different plants and many hands. So this can make traceability very complicated. A critical tracking event, or CTE, is an important step in the supply chain where the information required by the rule must be recorded and maintained to be able to trace the product in the event of an outbreak. For example, one step would be customs. So a critical tracking event is a step where the product information changes and it is necessary to record this information. So how are we doing up to now? So you have these videos available to you. They will be available soon, rather. And I can show you as well the guides. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint to show you what the guides have. But all of the information I have presented is included in these 3 videos. I think this webinar is very important. And I think the gap analysis is one of the most important aspects. This webinar is being recorded, and so you can go back to that gap analysis to determine where to start. So here we have an example of a traceability plan. We created a fictitious company to create a traceability plan. We were in Sinaloa with our colleagues from the fruit fly free zone in Mexico, and we visited some packing houses and orchards to talk about traceability plans. And we developed a model traceability plan or a sample traceability plan that explains the KDEs and the CTEs. And we have a traceability plan for the orchard, for the packing house, for the import warehouse, some examples of records. If you use tickets, that's fine. That can all be used for a traceability plan. But it's important to look at perhaps what information you might need to add to those tickets to make sure you're covering all of the KDEs. Examples of records. Here we have examples of a spreadsheet, a sortable spreadsheet. So basically, we are carrying out some of these activities. So it's important to do a gap analysis to determine what gaps you have. When I started reading this, it seemed very complicated because it includes new concepts. And with the resources, the materials developed by the National Mango Board, we attempted to explain these concepts in a simplified manner. For example, the KDEs and the CTEs. The rule says you have to identify what activities you perform that are CTEs or critical tracking events, and you have to gather certain information that the FDA calls key data elements. So basically, that is the heart of the rule. If the rule applies to you, you will have to have a traceability plan and you will have to make some adjustments to your plan. It's very important to know in river falls to be able to identify a mango sold in river falls, because if not, a small problem can turn into a huge problem. I like to make an analogy. It's as if mangoes, if you don't know how to identify them, it would be like you have a wrestler's mask on and you don't know who is who. So, with the traceability lot codes and all of this information of the rule, we take this mask off the mangoes and we can determine where they came from. And if we have a problem, instead of recalling an entire week of production, we can just recall one pallet or two pallets, whatever the lot may be. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. I think we have a few minutes for questions. The National Mango Board materials are great. They're very practical. And before the questions, I forgot to show you something.
Right here. These are the materials from the National Mango Board. As I was telling you, here you can see the full guide with all the contents. These are materials that have already been approved by USDA. We developed them with Food Safety Strategy, who is a strategic partner of ours, together with Food Safety CTS. Everything that I've shared with you in this webinar, you can find it in our materials. And it is explained in a very detailed manner. And again, if you are asking yourself, how can I do this? How can I learn about this? You can take a look at the full guide or the quick guide. It's only 20 pages, the quick guide, but it's full of pictures. So it's not that long. Now I am done, Natalia. Thank you, doctor. We have time for some questions. I can check the questions if you want. Roberto was asking, is a transformation mixing orchards? And the answer is, it's mixing lots. Transformation by the FDA, and I'm referring to fresh mango only. Let's imagine that there's an import warehouse, and maybe they have 100 pallets. out of 100 pallets, there are 4 different lots, and you repack them so that you have a great lot, one that only has big mangoes, for instance, because I have a particular customer that requests them, and I take different mangoes from different lots. This is considered transformation by the FDA. Now, Martin Mercado is pointing out something very interesting. He says we're already doing that, but we don't have a system yet. We need an IT platform to be able to do that, and we're working on it to be able to have this system for the USDA. The International System Associations has a very interesting group on traceability. I think that, it's the capacity of being able to identify my mango. If my mango is masked, I will not know where it's coming from, and my problem will become a huge deal. Another question: are the materials already available in the National Mango Board website? Well, we wanted to publish them, but they are first in food safety. They have been just approved by the USDA. Sergio was saying, excellent presentation. Thank you. There's one question in the Q&A. If you want to take a look. Oh, yes, Julio Pineda. He asks, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that certain information can be kept and maintained, and certain information needs to be passed on to the next step, the customer, I understand. So what type of information do we need to share with our customers? Julio, this is a very interesting question, and it has to do with the KDEs. Once the guides are released, I will share them with you all. I have all your email addresses. Now, if we focus on all of the KDEs right now, it will be very confusing. However, it is very simple information, and I will share with you the reference materials. I don't know if there's anything else. Natalia? Bismarck, the copies of the guides will be available in the National Mango Board website. And yes, probably we can also share the links via email. Martin Mercado is mentioning something very important, which is creating a campaign so that we can create awareness on the rule. This is something that we could discuss for our newsletter. Yes. If you're interested in having copies of the guides, you can get in touch with us, National Mango Board, and we will share with you the guides once they are available. We can send them to you directly to your email address. No, we don't really have a campaign yet, but there's a lot of webinars and information out there. But yes, this is a great idea to try to carry the message. If there are no other questions, I wanted to thank Dr. Nieto for his presentation. I hope to see you in our next online webinar, which will be with Dr. Sergio Nieto-Montenegro about the final FSMA rule. It will be on September 25th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This is all for today. Thank you so much and have a great day.